Good afternoon. My name is Tim McConnell with Grahall Consultants. Welcome to the second of our two-part series, our two-part instructional series on organization design. In part one, we looked at some of the introductory aspects of organization design. This afternoon, we're going to look at part two, which is strategic organization design and workforce planning. Our agenda is going to consist of 4 parts. We'll have an overall introduction to organization design, which is a bit of a repeat from section 1, but it sets the stage and the context for us here. In Unit 2, we're going to look at something quite different, international organizations and how they are structured from an org design perspective. Unit 3 is going to address workforce planning as part of the implementation of organization design. In Unit 4, we're going to look at implementation strategy and what that is all about, specifically the implementation of a new organization design model, as well as implementation of your workforce planning exercise. So we're going to look at things like talent reviews and succession planning. So let's get to it. As part of Unit 1, we're going to look at strategic goals of an organization design. We're going to look at understanding your organization from a conceptual business model perspective. We're going to look at the concept of structure versus strategy, structure and strategy. We're going to look at environmental considerations and then move into organization design and workforce planning as a concept. So what is the goal of organization design? It's to make your organization more effective. It's all about alignment. It's aligning the functions and the roles and the tasks and the positions that you have in your organization to your business priorities. As it says here, we're looking at transforming inputs into outputs and providing value in the best way possible. We're looking at executing the organization's mission. We're looking at maximizing efficiency through the proper use of resources with minimized costs and maximizing effectiveness of your organization, whatever your organizational goals are. We'd like to start off when we review an organization as part of an OD exercise by looking at the conceptual business model. We could take any organization and boil it down into one piece of paper, one very high level, obviously it's high level, concept of what is your business. So we use this as a standard methodology, and this can apply to every organization. Every organization has a strategic business plan, a mission, and a vision of where they want to go. Every organization has a governance model, for example, your board of directors. Every organization starts with inputs. Inputs can be things like money, people, ideas, support from donors, etc. Transformation process is whatever your business does. And the business processes that are involved in that. And every organization has outputs. So what is the end result of what you do in your organization? Lastly, we've got support functions. These could be completely different for a different organization. An NGO, for example, versus a manufacturing company, this middle part is going to look very different. However, they're all going to have support functions such as human resources, IT, finance, corporate services, facilities, that kind of thing. Principles of organization design. Things we need to consider. These include, for example, looking at what organization design is. So it's a process. So it's an activity, if you will. Organization design of aligning, there's my A word again, alignment. Aligning an organization structure with its mission. It involves looking at the complex relationships between functions, tasks, workflow, responsibility, authority, and accountability to make sure that these all support the business, they're all integrated properly, they all come together. At a practical level, there are several things to consider. Division of labor. How are you going to separate the different functions? For example, if you're making widgets in a manufacturing company, then the manufacturing people would be different from the design people, different from the marketing people, etc. Other aspects we consider in org design are coordination and control. What is the chain of command in terms of how many layers you have in the organization, as well as how free people are, or how empowered to make decisions they might be. Span of control in terms of supervisor relationships, who is accountable, who has the authority to make decisions in different areas. All of these things have to be considered. Lastly, we look at separating line operational activities versus staff and support activities. And once we've got your functions nailed down, then we get into, as we drill down, into specific job design. I've mentioned the word alignment before. It's aligning the structure of our organization to the business strategy that we're trying to follow. This is a well-known term, structure follows strategy. It's actually quite controversial if you look at the literature out there. The different people will say different things about this. Some people reverse this and say strategy follows structure. But this works for us. So our view is that the structure is the means to achieving an organization's strategy. So structure is how you make it happen. It's not simply boxes on an org chart. It's all about people, positions, procedures, processes, culture, etc. that comprise the organization, how all these bits and pieces come together. So all of these need to be integrated, key word here, integrated, with strategy in order for your organization to achieve its mission and its goals. So structure not only follows strategy, but supports strategy. If you change your business strategy, then you probably want to change your organization design structure. We don't live in a closed world, so external considerations are important. There's a concept out there of systems theory and open systems theory that tells us when we design an organization structure, we need to bear in mind not just all the internal factors that we were talking about on the previous slide, but the external world around us. If our environment changes, then we may want to consider changing our structure, again, so everything is aligned with what's going on. So your organization may be, depending on your business sector, where you live, etc., your environment may be very complex, or it may be very simple. It may be very stable in terms of not changing, or it may be very dynamic and it's changing continually. And your organization structure has to fit into that and to adapt as necessary. As I mentioned, later on we're going to talk about workforce planning and how this all links. This diagram provides our view of all of this. So we've got, if we want to start back over here with organization design, when we conduct an organization design project, we look at a variety of things. We look at fact-finding. So this is the consultants getting to know your organization. So we do this by two areas, paper and people. People would be talking to executives, talking to key stakeholders, focus groups with staff, and paper would be reviewing documents on your business strategy, etc., including your website. Organizational analysis is starting with that conceptual business model and getting into figuring out, okay, what's going on with your organization? What are the challenges? There are 7 symptoms of ineffective organization design. So are those present in your organization? What's working well? What's working less well? The secondary here is getting into options. We can look at any business. Okay, what are the major functions that are being performed in this organization? Let's map those out using a bit of a building block approach. And we can come up with options, etc., and validate those. And then we get into detailed organizational modeling, which is getting into actual jobs. So this is our organization design process. You can learn more about it by watching the first video in our series on organization design. And as I mentioned, when we did that first series, what you then get into is you can map out an organization on paper, but then what about the people in the organization? Obviously, they're there. They have to be considered. How does that fit and integrate? And this is where we get into workforce planning. Depending on what kind of HR management system you have, we would collect data so we know who the staff are, what their skill sets are, what their interests are, that can't be overlooked, and what their performance is, are they superstars or not, etc. So that's part of our workforce analysis. We can then look at your workforce and identify the talent. And a talent risk assessment is the risk of talent leaving. So there's a term we use called flight risk. And then we can identify as well, based on your data and workforce analysis, who are the star people in your organization in terms of having them fit into your mission critical roles. And this isn't HIPPO, it's HYPO, high potential staff. So a star may be a star today, and a high potential person is someone who's high potential tomorrow, for tomorrow. We go through an exercise called position mapping, which maps people to jobs, etc. And then we say, okay, what are the variances here? We may have people that don't fit the organization anymore. We may have new positions that have to be recruited for this kind of thing. So what we get into then is do we have the people in your organization fully mapped? Are you fully staffed? Are all your positions filled, etc.? Fully mapped to the new organization, and does it all work, and does it fit? This is where we're getting real. You don't want your superstars leaving the organization, so depending again on your environment, so this comes into play. Where are we in terms of retention? Are these people staying? If they're not, what are you doing about it? Succession planning, looking down the road, etc., not just for executive positions, but for mission critical positions, and we'll talk about identifying those. Continuous workforce planning over time. Quite often we find that clients, they're not looking ahead. They said, okay, all our positions are filled, everyone's here today, we've done our job, let's go home. But what about tomorrow? What about 3 years down the road? And then how do all your business processes fit in if you've changed the organization? Does all of that workflow still work effectively? Welcome to Unit 2. In Unit 2, we're going to look at international organizations, because the design of your structure, your organization plan, etc., could be different once you start getting outside of your home country. There are different ways of looking at international organizations. So what we're going to talk about here is these things. Why organizations may wish to expand internationally. Structures that can be used for spanning geography, and there are a number of different terms that we're going to use. Some of the advantages and disadvantages of these different structures. How these aren't necessarily all black and white or static, etc. An organization may evolve over time. And then challenges that international organizations might face. So this is our international section. Why would you want to expand outside of Canada or the United States? No organization is isolated from the influence of the global environment. There may be several driving factors in all of this. They can include a desire to move in a different direction, to achieve economies of scale, to reduce costs. There could be things like economies of scope, so reduction in total cost as opposed to unit cost, and the desire to find low-cost production factors somewhere else, so reducing your salary level, for example, by moving production from the United States or Canada to a third world country. The challenge with that is, as you know, that's quite controversial for a bunch of reasons. But these are some of the rationales, the reasons why organizations may go outside their home country. There's different kinds of structures spanning geography, so we're going to spend a bit of time on this slide. 4 terms that we're going to use: international, transnational, global, and multinational. So some people use these words interchangeably, and sometimes we're guilty of that. If you look these up on the internet, you may find different definitions, but these are the ones that we're comfortable with, that we use. You can look at dividing these or sorting them by to what extent are they locally responsive as opposed to just headquarters, and to what extent is there optimal sourcing of resources, including funding and people. An international organization, I'm just going to read from my notes here, is, as it says here, create centers of excellence or hubs for each major product of service. Another way to look at it is an organization whose major focus is still on one country, but they are engaged in a few different areas of the world, but not worldwide. Importers and exporters would be an example of that. International organizations tend not to have investment outside of their home country. A global organization is a bit more centralized. It operates in many different regions of the world and invests in many different regions of the world. It's centralized, as I mentioned, but boundaryless in the sense that there are different regions, different countries that are all part of the business, but they're interdependent and they're interconnected. Multinational down here is a bit more decentralized. You would have investments in other countries, and you would be selling products or providing services in other countries of the world that are adapted to each international local market as opposed to being standardized worldwide. So what decision you make on that point alone would affect your organization design structure. Transnational is where you're taking advantage of a location of regional or country-based organizations, so your design is based on that. It's much more complex than the other three models. The organization that is transnational would be fully invested in foreign operations. It probably would still have a corporate headquarters, central headquarters. But a key difference is that a transnational organization gives decision-making power, R&D power, marketing power, etc., to the regions, to the other countries. So obviously these terms overlap a little, but we find them useful. So we look at our four terms in terms of advantages and disadvantages. An international organization is leveraging its home country-based advantages. It's relatively easy to implement. Transnational at the end is very cost efficient. It's got a central operation, but it's still extremely locally responsive and very engaged in global learning, for example. And there are some disadvantages here as well. Your international organization which is centralized in its home country would definitely have a lack of local responsiveness, which could affect your customer base. Multinational organizations, because they're doing everything separately in each country, you could find duplication of costs, so things could get expensive. And the downside of a transnational organization is they're quite complex and difficult to implement. We find there's an evolutionary trend here, or pattern, which would look like this. So an organization, and a lot of organizations obviously start in one country. So they're domestic. At some point in time, they may evolve to be international, where they're importing from other countries or they're exporting to other countries. They move into multinational, as we defined it. They may then move to a global stage. And we tend to, this is our opinion, view transnational organizations as sort of being at the high end of the evolutionary development curve. So there's a lot more we can talk about here in terms of what does your organization structure look like and how do you operate if you're at any one of these 5 different stages. Some of the challenges for international organizations, challenges in going global. You're obviously increasing both your internal and external complexity. Language is a problem. What language are you communicating in worldwide? What about all the different regulations and cultures that you're going to face? Can you move people from one country to another with relative ease or not? How do you communicate in worldwide, etc.? How do you deal with work visas and different laws and currencies in every different country? It can get quite complex. It may enhance the requirement for an integration of your divisions and departments. So to what extent you are in terms of those 5 stages, the first one being domestic, is directly affects, drives your organization design structure. And that's the end of Unit 2. Good afternoon. Welcome to Unit 3. In Unit 3, we're going to address workforce planning and analysis. What are we going to cover? We're We're going to look at defining our terms. What is workforce planning? Some of the things to consider in workforce planning, the benefits of doing workforce planning and actually doing it, not just saying that you're doing it. We're going to look at the risks of not conducting workforce planning, and then we're getting into something slightly different but clearly related, and that is succession planning. So what is workforce planning? Again, it's a process. It's a process of taking that organization structure that you have and making sure that you're staffed with the right people, that you have the right people in the organization on a regular basis. The saying is having the right people in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. That's what this is all about. A key word here is planning. Planning is thinking ahead. It's saying, okay, where are we today? Where are we going to go tomorrow? Are we going to have the right, and this is the job of your HR department, are we going to have the right people with the right skills, as I mentioned, in the right position? That's HR's responsibility, is to make that happen. So it's a process of assessing an organization's current workforce and composition and determining how to meet future needs. It looks at identifying a gap, if you will, between supply and demand, between the supply of people that you have now, the supply of people that may be available to you in your local and the international workforce, and the demand that your organization has for those skill sets. So is there no gap in place? Are those two things fully matched? And just because they match today doesn't mean that they're going to be matched tomorrow. So it's a process of evaluating internal and external factors to determine if we need to do things in the future, such as recruiting, training, outsourcing, etc. We look at the number of employees, the age of your workforce, these kinds of things, skill availability. Again, it's a process at determining potential skills gaps. When it's done well, workforce planning provides the organization with a greater capacity, capability, and flexibility to not only get the job done today, but get the job done in the future. Elements to consider in workforce planning. It helps us to ensure that the organization, if we're doing workforce planning, has people, as I mentioned, the right people in the right place with the right skills at the right time and the right price. So how much are we paying them? So compensation is obviously a factor as well. We need to be able to match what's going on in our environment, in our local markets in terms of compensation. Yet at the same time, we need to be able to keep the CFO happy and that he or she knows that we're in budget. Things to consider when we're doing workforce planning. Are we attracting qualified candidates and keeping them? Do we have a process to select the best person for the job? Do we have a process to develop and train employees to meet organizational requirements, both today and in the future? Are we retaining our key talent? First of all, do we know who our key talent is? Are we properly rewarding them, etc.? And what are we doing in terms of retaining knowledge? So corporate memory is a factor here as well. Benefits of workforce planning. If you're doing it properly, a lot of organizations say they do workforce planning, but their focus is on the present and not necessarily on the future. So it's really, as I mentioned, a planning ahead exercise. It's a very complex exercise. A lot of HR departments say they do it, but in reality, they're not doing it as well as they could be. So when we're doing workforce planning, what are the benefits? You want to be proactive, so thinking ahead. Ideally, you're managing your labor costs as effectively and efficiently as possible, so you're not reacting by being taken by surprise if something bad happens. You're making sure that your staff have the appropriate skills for your business. And not only, again, today, but in the future. And how do you get those skills? You can train people. You can hire people with those skills. What are your options? What are the best options for your business and for every department today and tomorrow? We can make sure we're addressing skill shortages. The last thing as an HR department that you want to have to do is stand up in front of a director or a manager and say, hey, I'm sorry, I know you have that vacant job and it's very important to accomplish the goals of your department. However, I can't find anyone to fill that job. That's a problem, a big problem. Other problems, if you're not conducting workforce planning properly, so instead of being proactive, you're being reactive. Instead of saying, hey, I identified that problem that's going to happen in 6 months, I've planned for it, and when 6 months arrives, then it's no longer a problem because we fixed it in advance. If you're being reactive, then that problem, that negative surprise, somebody leaves, a skill requirement shifts suddenly on you, or you realize that we don't have enough capacity or the right skills to perform certain mission critical functions in the organization, because you're being reactive. Well, that problem is just going to hit you in the face right away. If you're reacting all the time and not planning, it increases your costs. So I think an HR department has to be accountable for managing your labor force costs in an effective manner, and that requires effective workforce planning. As I mentioned, if you don't do this, you run the risk of having a lack of capable candidates to fill critical roles, and that in turn affects the organization and its business. So we have workforce planning, and then we have something a bit different called workforce analysis. Some people use the phrases together, workforce analysis and planning, or planning and analysis. So they're obviously related. There are some concepts that we would like to introduce you to in workforce analysis, again related to workforce planning and related to our organization design methodology. So when we are looking at the boxes on an org chart, right here we're saying, okay, there are people in those jobs. Let's categorize those people, if you will. A couple of terms that we use are these: critical positions and star employees. So what's a critical position? A critical position is one that you can't live without. It's deemed to be providing a competitive advantage to the organization. On the next slide, we're going to define this in a bit more detail. But as I said, it's jobs, positions that you can't live without. They're crucial to your core business. A star employee is someone who is a high performer. So we use the word talent, high talent, that kind of thing. So a star employee exhibits a high degree of current and potential performance and exceeds your performance expectations. And they basically bring in the value, the productivity, etc., that drives your business. So do you know who your star employees are today in your organization? A few more terms that we use. High potential employees. These are our tomorrow's stars, if you will. They're employees that exhibit a potential for growth. They're working well now. They're fully meeting work expectations. And they may be part of our succession planning initiatives. They're people that we want to keep and develop because they're going to be our stars, not just of today, but of tomorrow. We can't ignore the average bear, if you will, the average employee. They tend to fall in the middle of the range in terms of performance, etc. But they may be the bulk of your workforce, and they need to be properly managed and treated. Potential reductions, if you've gone through a workforce planning exercise and you find you have excess capacity, meaning you have more people and you have jobs because things have changed or the organization has shrunk, then have we identified those people and do we have a plan in place to move them out? And so they potentially may exhibit a potential for growth, or they're not performing, that kind of thing. So have you identified those folks, and how are you managing them? Succession planning is part of workforce planning. It's a popular term, so you've all heard that phrase, succession planning. We defined it as a systematic, so it has to be organized and thought through, and a defined program that builds your future talent. It builds the bench strength, if you will, for your organization. How do we do that? We do that by identifying and preparing suitable internal candidates to fill key positions when they become available. It ensures a smooth continuation of business operations when incumbents leave. So again, we're anticipating the future and we're getting ready for it, so we're not being taken by surprise. So why would a position become available? Somebody may retire, somebody may win the lottery and they've moved to Hawaii tomorrow. Somebody may resign on you suddenly because somebody made them a better offer. Somebody may pass away suddenly, this kind of thing. So you notice I'm using the word suddenly a lot. In fact, the only thing not said in here is retirement. Presumably you know when your people are going to be retiring, but it's not necessarily based on age. You need to be asking them, hey, when are you planning on retiring? Succession planning also identifies skill and knowledge gaps and makes sure that as HR people that we're able to fill all of our critical positions with the right talent. So we view succession planning as something that's flexible. You may want to be reviewing this, not necessarily every week, but certainly once or twice a year, absolutely. So it's a long-term view, generally anywhere from 1 year to 3 years to 5 years of your staffing. It's a deliberate effort. It's not something that you do casually or informally. It should definitely be part of a broader HR strategy because it relates to your staffing programs, it relates to your training and development programs. So in succession planning, what we're doing is we're identifying critical positions. We're assessing, okay, there's somebody in that job today. Who are the people that could fill that job tomorrow, and are they ready? So we can go through a ranking. Yes, Tim is ready tomorrow, or to step into that job if and when it becomes vacant. Or no, Tim's not ready for a year from now because I need to learn a certain skill set or to get experience in a certain part of the organization, or that kind of thing. Welcome to Unit 4 of our program on Advanced Organization Design and Workforce Planning. In Unit 4, we're going to look at our implementation strategy of the workforce planning that we talked about in Unit 3. Things we're going to consider are an implementation strategy model, so things to be considered. We're going to look at the steps in the implementation process, including talent review, a targeted retention plan, and how we actually create a succession plan. So all of this, the goal then is to make it real, to put it on the ground, to make things happen. So this slide's lots of color here. It's fairly busy. We're trying to do a number of things. This model literally started on the back of a napkin one day in working with a client as we said, there's so many considerations here. There's this, there's that, there's this other thing. How's it all going to work? And believe it or not, it does work. So let's look at some of this. We use the word dashboard. We're big fans of dashboards. A dashboard, like in a car or an airplane, a flight deck is a visual representation of a lot of complex data that's been summarized down into something that I can quickly tell, so I can look at my car and know how fast I'm going. So that's a dashboard. So we've gone through an organization design exercise. We've gone through a workforce planning exercise and done position mapping, which we talked about in the first part of this course. And let's now look at both positions and people. So positions and incumbents are people. So what are some of the things as we move to implement a redesigned organization that we might wish to consider? So we want to flag positions as mission critical. So what's required there from HR is a succession plan. There may be core employees. Those are our average employees. That may be the bulk of our workforce that we need obviously to be managing effectively. There may be people, positions that are redundant. They're no longer needed as we implement our new organization design structure. So you may be looking at RIF, reduction in force, or outplacement. You may have jobs that are vacant, and so the action required there is hiring. On the incumbent side, you've got a position that's vacant, so there's hiring required. You may have someone that you've identified in your workforce planning and analysis exercise as a high potential staff. So what do we need to do with them? We need to retain them, to keep them, and to develop them. We may be identifying our stars, so we need then to retain and develop them. That's the R&D. Flight risk is someone that is in an important job, has the right skill set, etc. They're highly marketable. We know that other organizations may be coming along and offering them other positions, etc. Their risk of leaving is higher than the average person. So we obviously need to take advanced steps to retain those people, to keep them. And retirement, as I mentioned, are the people that, because of their age, that we know we're going to be retiring at a certain age, or we want to ask them, when are you planning on retiring? Some people may retire early by choice. Others may retire, later by choice. In the third, so this busy model slide, if you will, has three parts. There was sort of what we're doing. There's a definition of our dashboard legends. Over here we have a sample work unit. And what are we trying to do here? So this is a very basic organization chart. We've labeled our jobs, job A, job B, job C, etc. This department is department B, so we have A, B, C in department B. And in department C we have these positions. At the bottom half of the box, we had the people in the job. So let's look at the positions. So S, where was our S? Over here, this director, the person, the position at the top of this organization structure, we've identified as critical, and we need to be putting in place a succession plan for that individual. So this is the kind of thing that's going on. This job is vacant. There's nothing really going on here. In job C, we've identified it as important to the organization. And what are we going to do about that? This person may be retiring, and they're high potential staff. What are we going to do about it? Okay, so you could take this. The key point here is take your organization chart and label it. Label the positions, are they critical or not, and then label the people in those jobs based on these codes here and see how it matches up. So steps, we're very big on steps in an implementation process. So before we even get to number one, you would do an organization design review, again, because of requirements in your organization, in your environment, etc., so that you've got that alignment that we've talked about that you're trying to achieve. You then go through an organization and talent review. You then can identify for your hypos, for your flight risks, etc., a targeted retention plan. A lot of HR departments don't have a retention plan. A retention plan is somewhere where we're actively saying, I need to keep these key people. What am I going to do about it? Don't just assume that they're going to stay. They may not. It depends on the market. If it's a hot market, then you know these people are being recruited, so your retention plan will vary depending on whether you're in a hot market or whether we're in a recession and there's less jobs out there, so people are less likely to want to leave. We can do succession planning here, the workforce planning, as we talked about, and then business process reviews. These don't necessarily have to be in these order, so it's not necessarily 1 to 5, etc. It's just 5 things that need to be considered. So what are some of the things we might do here in terms of making this happen? So we have our steps at the bottom. So you want to create a plan for talent management to take that map, that colored slide we had a minute ago, and build it for your organization and spell it out. That would be a talent management assessment. You can look at workforce data that your organization has, things to consider. So do you know this about all of your employees? Do you know their status? Have you labeled them based on performance, appraisals and managers' viewpoints, etc., as a high potential or star employee or not? Do you know what developmental opportunities exist in your organization? And do you have a career development plan? Do you do career mapping, these kinds of proactive strategic HR activities to make this all happen? Do you have an HR management system? It doesn't have to be a fancy computer system. It can be in a file cabinet. The point is get the data and keep it up to date. So someone attends a conference, learns a new skill, then this needs to be added to the database. So what is their work history? Do we know how someone over time has progressed through the organization? Do we know what everyone's specific skills and experience are? A lot of organizations don't. We sometimes see clients where they'll post a position, they'll post it internally because they have to, because of their policies and procedures, but they're more focused on outside, on on in the newspaper, on job bulletin boards, etc., on getting external candidates. And then if somebody applies from internally, an existing employee who from a different department who has that skill set, and the HR department didn't know. I mean, they could have saved all the money on external recruiting if they had done this talent management assessment properly. Okay, so these are the kind of things we might do. Back to my colored slides here, a sample talent management action. I think we've identified some of these terms. So this is again our sample work unit. These are the legend, if you will. So we have critical positions. So in this organization, this little sort of model organization design, if you will, we've identified the red ones, job A, B, C. So my director, my two managers, and this position down here, that's absolutely critical to running my business, which means I need people in those jobs with the right skills at all times. My core employees and positions are the ones in black, and jobs that we may no longer need anymore are in gray here. In terms of actions for employees, we've got a vacant position down here, so we need to be, so job CB, we need to be filling this position. We've got a high potential person over here that we need to be putting in place, say, a career development plan for. So this kind of thing. We've got a big risk here because we have someone that we've identified as a flight risk in a position that we've identified as critical. So the odds of them leaving are higher than normal. And the problems that are going to be created if and when this person leaves that job suddenly are very crucial. So that's our area of greatest risk. Our area of greatest opportunity is someone in this area that we've identified as an important position, and we need to retain that person and to develop them. So you could take in your business, in your organization chart, do this kind of talent management assessment and identify this. So this is giving you a view of the future of something that is there today, but you may not necessarily see it. So, and this is an opportunity for an HR department to add a lot of value to management and to the business by doing this kind of assessment. So in this case, I'm the HR manager, I've done this, and I'm going to this person's boss and saying, hey, do you realize you have this big liability, this little time bomb sitting here, this liability that, hey, this person's at risk of leaving for whatever reason, and we've identified this as a mission critical position. What are we going to do about it? Let's work to solve that problem before it becomes a problem. Okay, so we actually love these things. They're very effective tools. Targeted retention plans, this could be for all employees, or it could be for specific employees in either your flight risks or your stars and your high potential staff. What are we going to do to try to keep them? So what are we going to do to try to keep them? Let's look at this. Some of our clients don't necessarily agree with this, but we're say advise the employee. So ask them to say, hey, hey Tim over there, we're coming and we're talking to you. Do you know that us being the organization, the business, view you as a high potential employee? We're very happy with your performance, your attitudes, right? Your potential for developing and growing and learning new skills and moving into higher jobs in positions in our business is very high, and we want you to know that. Because they may not want to do that. They may say, you know what, I'm quite happy here in my clerical job, don't bother me. So you need to communicate with them. So communication is obviously very important. So you need to confirm their career interests and aspirations. You may say, hey, you know what, we want you to move into management, but that requires going to night school, and which we'll pay for, which is fine. But the employee says, I'm sorry, I have little kids at home, and I'm doing other things, and I really cannot make that investment. So you need to have that conversation with those people. Aside from that, you can be identifying developmental opportunities. It could be career assignments, or just giving them more complex work to do. But what are you going to do to make life interesting? Because a lot of employees will leave if they're bored. To make sure they're managed properly, because employees will leave if they don't like their supervisor. And so you're basically taking the roadblocks out of the road and making that path clear. Are they being paid properly? If you're going to be developing them and stretching them, if you will, there's a term called stretch assignments. The employee will say, well, this is very nice, and yeah, I may get a better job in the future, but are you going to pay me more today if I accomplish these? So is that appropriate or is it not? How does it fit in your business? So again, you're planning it all out. Okay, I think we've covered all these, so I'm going to move on here. So let's come back to succession planning. So succession planning is identifying in advance who the people are going to be in the future for our mission critical positions. So you can identify mission critical positions. On the next slide, we're going to define some of those. We can identify the competencies, the skills, etc. for critical positions. We can identify and assess potential candidates. We can put in place a learning and development plan. We can then evaluate the effectiveness of the plan. Is it working or not? If it's not working, why not? And what can we do to change it? So these are 5 steps in a succession planning process. So who do we do succession planning for? We do it for senior management. We may also do it for other positions. So let's look at some of those. So these are our criteria. We can look at the mission. Is the position a key contributor to the organizational mission? Does it have a significant involvement in strategic and operational decisions? Is it a leadership position, so that if relates to our management team? Is it a critical function in the sense that we've got core business activities that are absolutely integral and vital to the success of our business? So have we identified those positions and those tasks, etc.? Do we have jobs where the incumbent is the only person who knows about certain things? So if that person leaves, then that knowledge walks out the door with that person. Have you identified that? There are people in some organizations that are hubs. They have the situational awareness. They have the right personality that they know about other essential functions, and people come to them all the time for advice and support. Other people, not even just people in their department. If they leave, then that creates a problem. In fact, you could boil all this down to answering that one question. If that person leaves, is it a problem? Is it essential in nature? So would the business suffer if the position was not filled for some time? There may be some legal requirements that you have to have certain people on board. We've all been on airplanes where we're late in taking off, and then they come on and say, well, sorry, the pilots have exceeded their 10 hours a day by law. They're no longer required to fly, and they literally walk out and leaving you sitting there. Specialization, there may be jobs that have a vital specialty or expertise that you need. Staffing and turnover, if that person leaves the job tomorrow, how quickly can I replace them? If it's an accounts payable clerk and I know I can put an ad or make a few calls, call an agency and get a new accounts payable clerk here tomorrow, then that's not necessarily a job that we would need to have a succession plan for. If the opposite exists, and if that person leaves and I'm trying to fill that job and there's a major market shortage of people with that skill, then I'm not going to be able to fill it very quickly, and then we have a problem. So how much time and effort and cost would it take to fill that position? So have you answered all these questions in order to identify critical positions, again, in your organization? Do you know what your mission critical positions are? And I would say as the HR manager or as an executive, you need to know this. And it's your data. There's some tools we can introduce to talk about succession planning for a position that has been identified as a mission critical position, a job for which you need a succession plan. then what do we do next? So we can identify, okay, we have this job. The example here is President and Chief Executive Officer. What are the primary competencies required for this job? In this case, we have technical competencies, behavioral competencies, strategic orientation, leadership, but we've written them all down. So when we come to assess our candidates, we can ask ourselves, how does my candidate stand up against all of these skills? Do they have it now, or will they have it in the future? In our next slide, then, we say, okay, here's the position that we talked about the position, and so this is part 2 of this, and it's who are the candidates. And so we've got, let's say the position was the Chief Executive Officer. This person is the Vice President. They're next in line, if you will. What are the key competencies that this person has? Do they line up and match with the competencies that we just identified as crucial for that key position? And then what's some of the demographic data about this person? What's their name, age, length of service, how long have they been in their current job? If they've only been in the current job a few months, then we may not be ready to move them. What's their salary? How are they measuring up on performance? What is their potential to step into the president role both now and in the future? Are they ready today? Are they ready in a year or two, depending on how you define medium and high? Or they may not be ready for 5 years. Then, so assess that readiness. And then what are the gaps in terms of what do we need if they're not ready, if they have to wait those years, what are we going to proactively do in that time period to grow and develop that person so that they are ready when the CEO position becomes vacant? So our job as HR is to be able to say to senior management, hey, you know what? When that person leaves, we're ready. We're not going to be taken by surprise. There's not going to be major panic to fill that job, and then we may learn that we can't fill it quickly. We've got it all planned out in advance. To us, this is effective HR management. To us, this is effective implementation of an organization design and talent management program. Thank you very much.